Well, it's Grottu episode 374. Um, we're here on a beautiful May morning. Last episode, I started telling the origin of Grottu, and my phone memory passed away, died. It evaporated. So I will begin again. My father was in the Army and met my mother in San Antonio. He was from up Philadelphia. His parents, his dad was German, his mom was Irish. His dad was a professional baseball player, and then became a scout, and then later did some civil service job, I think, in his later years. And my mom was of French-Irish descent, and her ancestors were some of the original settlers in Texas. So, anyway, I was born in April of 1965. My two older brothers were born 10 years earlier in the 50s. I was heavily influenced by the toys handed down to me, which were from the 60s and late 50s. They were all clearly superior to the toys available in the local kiddie city, or they didn't have Toys R Us, at least not in the part of the country I lived in. So I knew my older brothers were into comic books. They favored DC. They weren't into Marvel at all. But I never got, those comics were never handed down to me. They must have been tossed out during one of the many moves since, but I know that they at one point had a Foot Locker full of old comics and Tonka trucks, and I just remember a lot of the cool culture from my older brothers, and I learned about music from my older brothers, so I was growing up primarily in the 70s, but I had a lot of influence from the 60s and 50s, and I've always liked the past, and I've never really been happy with the time period I was living in. So, as far as comic books go, first comic book I ever received was Choo Choo Charlie, a Gold Key comic, and that was because I was really into trains, because my oldest brother was a model railroader. Oh, and I loved the Model Railroader magazine that he used to get all the time, too. So, Choo Choo Charlie was my first comic book, and I remember the first comic book I ever actually bought on my own, where I had money in my pocket and I walked into the store and I gave the lady the money and I walked out with a comic book. I bought it on my own, and I must have been about 5, maybe 6. And that was a DC comic, Laurel and Hardy, I think, #1. They were on a ship or something on the cover. I don't have that comic now, and the Choo Choo Charlie didn't survive either, but I've gotten 2 copies of that since then. They were in really good shape. But yeah, I was in kindergarten. We were living in I was born in San Antonio, and I was there till I was 4, and then my father was given orders to go over to Germany. So we lived in Landstuhl, I don't know, I guess that's how you pronounce it, in Heidelberg. When we were living in Landstuhl, there was no television, at least we didn't think so. So in a way, I know what it's like to live in the 40s or early 50s when not everyone had television. and you read comic books, and you read and you entertained yourself. Well, we thought that there was only German television. There was an American Forces channel, but it was far away. Everyone figured in the, well, what do you call the housing that we live in was like 3 or 4 stories. It was like an apartment complex, but it's where the families lived that were stationed over there. I didn't know. I was told later that that's where officers lived during World War II. That was the German, the soldiers lived there, officers. So, but in 1970, that's only 25 years in the past, and a lot of people live in 25-year-old apartments, and they still look kind of new. But it's just kind of weird to know that the soldiers, the enemy that we were fighting against, used to live in the place that I was living in. At a certain point, my dad figured he'd get up and put a big antenna on top of the roof, and lo and behold, we were able to pick up that American language TV station. Then everyone started putting antennas up, and we could get American television, but we got one American station, and it was it was a pick and choose kind of thing. You had shows from all 3 networks. Star Trek was on Saturday night, I remember they had Julia, they had Sesame Street when it first started. I was in 1969. I was there 4 years old. I was the target audience. Although I think the target audience technically was inner city 4-year-olds, but I loved it. Sesame Street. You had cool movies on Saturdays. We had a 1969 Zenith color TV set. I think it was 21-inch or something. Or it was... Okay, cartoons. You had Roger Ramjet. You had Tom Terrific. You had Captain America and the Incredible Hulk from the Marvel superheroes, but those are the only 2 they show. They didn't show the other 3. The Flintstones. Let me think here. Man, there were some... There weren't a lot of cartoons. Porky Pig and Friends, you could see it, but you'd have to turn to another channel. That was on the German channel, so you get to see Porky Pig talk in German. But boy, I love the theme song to that Porky Pig and Friends show. Yeah, so, damn, what else was on? Oh, they had Partridge Family on. It was just, you had one channel. Here in the States, you've got 3 channels, maybe 4 if you count PBS, or maybe if you have an independent channel, 5, but we had 1. And we lived over in Germany from 1969 to 72. Then we moved from Landstuhl to Heidelberg. And then for the 72-73 school year, we were back in the States living in Hampton, Virginia. But during that time that we were in Germany, that's when I really started collecting comics. And there was the PX. There was, even though you were in Germany, you lived on base and everyone spoke English. All the stores were English speaking. The movie theater, you had one channel in English, and there was a English language top 40 radio station too. So there was a bookstore with a huge magazine rack. I mean, huge, from wall to wall, and the comics were there presented like magazines. They were not on a spinner rack. They were all laid out. I remember getting some Classics Illustrated, Disney type comics, but I became more interested in the monster comics. But the first thing I remember that I was obsessed with was Cracked magazine and Mad magazine. I saw, I think it's Biggest Greatest Cracked #2, and it was a special edition Cracked magazine with reprints from the 60s and maybe 50s. But I flipped through it, I fell in love with this magazine, and I told my mom, please go get this magazine for me. I told her what it was, and it was just the suspense. It was like waiting for Christmas morning. I came home from kindergarten or whatever that was, and she had it, and it was like the biggest thing in the world getting that magazine. I also loved Mad magazine. Mad, I'd have to get, if I wanted it, I'd have to have my mom approve it, because she didn't trust Mad. There was a cover around that time that showed the White House with the gate in front of the White House, and had a sign hanging, "This country is out of order," which is perfectly apt for today. But, my mom thought that was disrespectful to the country. And so that, although it seems like I got it anyway. I don't know, because I have that magazine. I think I bought it in that, or maybe I got that from my older brother. But anyway, she'd have to flip through Mad to make sure it was okay. Cracked, she seemed to trust. Cracked didn't seem as... Cracked never pushed the boundaries of disrespect to the country like Mad might have. But I remember getting the Mad special with the portraits where Alfred E. Newman is everyone from Napoleon to Hitler to Hirohito. It's Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. It's hilarious. That I remember getting that, and still have that copy, and I've gotten several since. And then the Mad with all the smiley faces on it, and then because the smiley faces were huge around that time. I remember my brother would get these smiley faces. I guess they sold them in his high school, and he'd bring them home to me, and it's just like the smiley face was like the big thing, man. It's hard to explain that today. So, Mad and Cracked. And I also would see this magazine on the stands, Famous Monsters of Filmland, and I would show that. It seems like I showed it to my mom, and she just would not let me buy that. I remember being obsessed with one issue with the mummy on the cover. Ironically, I'm just now realizing that my good friend who passed away a few years ago owned that original art for a while, the Basil Gogos art for that issue that I think I was really wanting when I was 5 or 6. Anyway, really into Casper, hot stuff. At that point, I was into the Harvey comics and Gold Key, and I didn't really understand the superhero stuff. I saw Captain America and Hulk on television. It seems like I got a Hulk comic once, but when things changed is when we moved back to the States. We moved to Hampton, Virginia, and we lived in a townhouse. It's really weird because a few years ago I was looking at, how you can on the computer, you can look at overhead views. I was looking at an overhead view of where I lived in Hampton, Virginia. I didn't realize that I lived maybe less than half a mile from the coast. I had no idea I was that close to the ocean. None. No one took me. Well, I know we stayed at a hotel near the ocean, but I didn't realize we lived that close. I had no idea. I mean, really, just almost like maybe 2 football fields away from the coast. We were that close, and I had no idea. Seems like I could have heard the waves crashing. Down the street, there was a 7-Eleven. I'd walk down there, and I would buy all kinds of comics. I remember buying the Demon DC comic, Jack Kirby. I remember buying Archie comics. I remember getting Chilling Adventures in Sorcery, the Sabrina comic that was drawn in the Archie House style, but it was very dark and horrifying, so it was very weird. But I started buying lots of comics at that point. But I was more interested in the monsters. The first Spider-Man comic I got was a Marvel team-up where he's, fighting the Werewolf by Night. And I was buying it for Werewolf by Night. So I didn't know the superheroes yet. So I knew, I was really buying the comic Ghosts, and I was really into House of Mystery and all the horror comics. And in second grade, there was a really good bookstore in Hampton, Virginia, and my mom would take me there like weekly, and I would bring up magazines to her, and she would approve them or not. I remember she let me get Monsters Unleashed #2. And it seems like, and I got like a issue of Vampirella and issue of Eerie. Usually she would say no, don't ever show me that again, that kind of thing. She really did not like anything. If you have like a cover with a skull, and it's one eye and one empty eye socket, that would just be it. She did not like to see any eye injuries. She had an injury to her eye when my oldest brother was a little baby flailing around, and I guess his little thumbnail must have grazed against my mom's eye. So if I showed her anything where an eye was injured, or like the Cyclops 50s horror movie where you got one empty eye socket, ooh, she would not like that. So horror comics were so I would get horror comics. Oh yeah, I really like Dennis the Menace at that time, and she'd have to approve the Dennis the Menace. She let me buy them, but she was very reluctant because she thought Dennis the Menace used poor grammar, and she was afraid I would start picking that up. She had the same problem, well, a similar problem with me watching the Three Stooges. She thought I'd pick up the violence that they did. So that was so my mom was very overprotective and all that, and I'm sure she'd been reading the women's magazines in the mid-50s about the horrors of comic books when my older brothers were babies before I was born. But anyway, I think she said that I couldn't buy the monster magazines without her approval until I was 10, I think. Or was it something like that, 10. Yeah, that seemed like a million years, or maybe it was 8. No, couldn't have been 8. 9. I don't know, but it just seemed horrible. But you see, when you say don't buy this, then you become more obsessed with it. So it could be, I wonder if my mom just let me buy all of it, everything, whether I'd be as obsessed with monsters today. And I think I would. I don't think that my obsession with monsters is just a rebellion because it was forbidden. Sometimes people, are attracted to forbidden fruit. But no, I just really loved all that stuff. And I loved the horror comics. I loved anything with a skeleton on the cover. Okay, so then we move to San Antonio, 3rd and 4th grade. That's when everything changed for me. And the thing that really changed me in my comic collecting ways was the Marvel Treasury Edition #2. I need to figure out, I could look on mycomicshop.com and see the month and year that came out. But that was a Fantastic Four issue. It had the Galactus trilogy, it had the Impossible Man, it was just a great collection of Kirby era Fantastic Four, and I loved it. Then I realized, I have these other Marvel comics that my mom's bought me, but I've never read. I've got the Marvel team-up with Spider-Man and Werewolf by Night, and sometimes I'd be homesick. My mom would go out and buy me some comics to give me something to do, cheer me up at home, and sometimes she'd pick up things that I wasn't that interested in, like the Amazing Spider-Man. And then once I read the Fantastic Four and Marvel Treasury Edition, I went back and found those comics in my collection and read them, and I realized Spider-Man is great. And these other, so then I realized Marvel superheroes are fantastic. And then I started reading DC. I mean, I'd had issues of Batman. So everything opened up to me. I remember I joined the Marvel fan club at the time called Foam, and got my membership kit and a subscription to the magazine, and just became a huge Marvel collector. My friends and I at school would draw our own comics. I've shown those before on this channel. Then wacky packages exploded at my school. That was one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me, is seeing wacky packages. And of course, that was my first exposure to Norman Saunders, who's great. And it just seemed like things just kept getting better and better. Let me be right back. Take care.